everybody. Welcome to the Fired Up with CJ show. Today we are going to be talking about Gen Z and the Gen Z effect. And we have Dan Keldsen here who's going to be talking and sharing. In fact, what is Gen Z? What is it? What's the effect? So welcome, Dan.
Thank you. Great
So
to
what
be here.
is it? What is Gen Z? There's all these different acronyms. Millennials, Gen Y, Gen Z. They're all flying around. How do you define Gen Z?
Yeah, so there's a reason why we called the book The Gen Z Effect and not Gen Z. So that's kind of the core philosophy there. There are mostly accidental buckets that people have been defined in specific generations. So the common ones that get thrown around these days are boomers, Gen X, there's the greatest generation, there's the silent generation,
Right.
there's Gen Y, millennials, which I noticed one of your more recent interviews was also about that topic.
Yes.
And then Gen Z is the more recent generation, which went from about 1995 to roughly 2015 is the born by date that was stamped on their foreheads.
Okay, so and one of the key concepts that you have in your book, The Gen Z Effect, was about how, and I should note that you have the beautiful book behind you.
Yes.
Flagging your head. Woo! Okay, so one of the things that you mentioned is that it's not necessarily, one of the points is that our fixation about this is my generation, that's your generation, I'm this, you're that. You're trying to break open that kind of idea. Why?
Yeah, so I see that a lot of harm has been done by putting up these walls essentially between generations, and they're really a fiction. So I think from the standpoint of the topics that you often cover, we're not mindful of what it means when we lump millions of people together by slapping a label on them.
Right.
That says that because you are a boomer, you must be whatever characteristics you throw all boomers into, which is not even remotely true.
Right.
It just means that people were born during a certain time frame, which means they have very common experiences. Sometimes depends on where you are in the world, your economic status, male, female, what race, etc. But that's like the worst potential stereotype you could slap onto something, because it's maybe a millionth of a percent of what actually defines them, and treats them just as another cog instead of an individual, which is really what we're getting down to.
And it's funny because we're moving, if I think about the new way in which we look at the world, right? It's not necessarily, it's like we're actually getting to be gender neutral, right? People are being careful not to use he and she because that's such a strong stereotype, right? And now the whole generation is like, what? And when I think about who came up with this whole generation idea, it's people who are from generally older people who have to come up with big buckets to classify like things together. And what's interesting is a lot of the younger adults nowadays, or my kids, they really don't. In fact, they've been raised not to stereotype or classify or generalize about anything, but yet they go into the work world and now they're millennials.
Right.
I just think the whole thing is kind of a fascinating thing, and I think. Going back to your comment about being mindful, we had talked about earlier in our correspondence about a mindfulness practice.
Sure.
And I was curious, how did that lend itself to when you're writing the book? Was it part of what you were trying to do in the book, or not?
So I don't think it was at the time I wouldn't have called it mindfulness, because I wasn't really following mindfulness as a practice at the time. Although I had hints of that when I studied a little bit of Eastern philosophy in college, and that really made a lot of sense to me. So I sort of rediscovered it in the last year, 18 months or so. The book came out in 2014, so it was shortly after the book came out that I discovered mindfulness. Might have a slightly different take on things. And actually, I'll plug somebody else's book. So I don't know if you've read 10% Happier by Dan Harris.
No.
It's very, very good. He's a skeptical reporter, and he just does a fantastic job at kind of peeling apart what is it if you don't want to dive into the depths of thousands of years of history to figure out and go back to the source. That's useful, but if you're really going to apply it, what does it mean to you? Are there real things that people can grasp onto today? And his goal was to be 10% happier by embracing mindfulness, which is a nice, reasonable goal that seems achievable and not something that's going to be your life's work necessarily, but get
Right.
you on the path,
Yeah.
which is what he describes. So I think in our book, in the Gen Z Effect, it really is. Now I describe it as essentially a mindfulness practice that you are mindful before you leap to conclusions based on what you believe somebody's is or what they say their age is, and therefore you'll lob a whole bunch of assumptions on them that they probably don't deserve,
Right.
and actually get to know them and understand what makes them tick versus anybody else who might be in that generation. And I've definitely personally seen that as a problem. I've done consulting to Fortune 50 organizations where they try to treat an entire swath of people exactly like every person in that generation, or worse, that everybody of every generation is exactly the same and therefore wants the same kind of rewards. They want the same kind of recognition. Some people do not want recognition, or they don't want public recognition anyhow. They don't want to be on a stage, for example.
Right.
And some people love that, and that's exactly what they want. And they could care less if they got a significant raise. They might also like that, but that's usually not the main motivator for people. So it's really about breaking down assumptions and rebuilding them. And essentially, I've described myself for a long time as a bridge builder, and it's often between business or management people and technology people. And I came from more of the technology side and stealthily migrated over to the business side. And I try to throw a line back to help others make the journey and help cross in both directions. And that's kind of the core, being mindful of these artificially created divisions that currently people believe are between generations. Remove those and then build bridges, because there's kind of ongoing wounds or ongoing echoes of this 40, 50-year myth of the generation gap that we're trying to work through on our own.
Yeah, and I'm not. I don't. I have had a 1 week retreat, a mindfulness-based retreat, where I was silent
Okay.
for 5 days, which for someone like myself, who's an extrovert, is extremely challenging.
Yes.
So I was quiet and just had to be. And the whole idea with mindfulness is to, as I understand it, not that that I'm proficient in it, but my understanding
Sure.
of it is to understand your thoughts and where your thoughts, where are they in the future, in the past, current, naming your thoughts if they're a feeling and a body sensation, emotion, planning for the future, and and watching carefully the track of your thought and letting go of it. And
Right.
I think how this applies when I think of mindfulness and this work, it's that, and what they say, this is all based on these ideas of the Four Noble Truths, I think, and Buddhism. And there are a
Right.
couple of concepts in there that I think that are really relatable to the stuff that I read.
Okay.
One is impermanence. Have you ever heard of that term?
Yes.
Impermanence, yeah.
Yep.
And my understanding of the word, and I'd love to hear your, because I think there's a connection. My understanding of impermanence is nothing is permanent. And we suffer when we think that things will always be the same, because we like the consistency and we like homeostasis. We want everything to be the same.
Right.
And the world, as I see it, is no longer in that place. So
Yes.
it creates suffering when we're trying to recreate what was, and we get attached to what was versus accepting that things have changed and allowing them to move forward from that place. So,
Right.
given that definition, how do you take your work, if possible, and map it to that idea of impermanence?
Sure. So the subtitle of the book is the six forces that are shaping our world, essentially. And one of the forces that I think applies to this is called slingshotting. And slingshotting, so both Tom Galopoulos, my co-author, and I, we've done a lot of innovation work, which is often people get stuck in their box. So we'll sort of use the out of the box, in the box
Right.
metaphors. And that's a sense of permanence, right? So we're stuck in I am whatever. I'm an accountant. I am the CEO. I'm a Fortune 50 company. I'm a nonprofit. There's a whole bunch of assumptions that get packed into that box. So I coined the term slingshotting as one of the forces, because there's essentially, to me, there's a tension. There's many different meanings. From the impermanent standpoint, if you are holding on to something too long, you are in some ways kind of stuck in a slingshot. And there's a tension that as the future moves away from you, you're stuck in the past. Sooner or later, you're going to spring forward whether you like it or not.
Right. Yeah.
And my goal would be that you steer that just a little bit so you don't go flying off the cliff. You
Right. So
actually,
if you pull it back because you're waiting so long, anchored in the past, if you're going to slingshot in a more random
yeah, you might want to
focused way.
choose which direction you're facing.
And I've experienced it. I came from Microsoft, and at the time, we were so, and this is the time of the internet. There was
Mhm.
a good portion of the people there who were like, "Hey, we have to open up. We can't have this Windows centric thing." It was
Yes,
moving towards a lot of the stuff that you see today, like
right,
open source, all this stuff, right? And like,
right.
let's make it open. And we're so stuck in our cash cows of Windows and the
Yes,
Office that we
exactly.
just did not. And so it was, I don't know if it's a slingshot, but it was not pretty where it ended. It was ugly,
Catapult.
DOJ, all this stuff kind of like,
Oh, yes.
yeah, like there was a whole bunch
I
of
remember
stuff
that.
during
Yeah.
that time that was
Yes.
because Microsoft was anchored in the old way of doing things, the status quo.
Right.
It kind
Hmm.
of, the slingshot kind of phenomenon, I think, occurred. And places like
Right.
Google came in and said, I see a market for it, baboom, and came
Yeah.
along.
Right. Yes.
And then we're like,
Exactly.
uh-oh, now we have to go chase Google.
Yes.
It's just, it's interesting. So that's the outcome. I think
Yes.
that's an example of an outcome that happens when when you're too stuck in your ways, then
Hmm.
someone's going to move forward and you may have to slingshot into some direction that you weren't even anticipating.
Yeah. And I don't remember who this is attributed to, but there's a saying: if you don't like change, you're going to like obsolescence even less.
Right.
So if you don't actually, if you don't go with the times, sooner or later, you're not going to matter anymore, which
Yeah.
is unfortunate. And it's totally avoidable.
Yeah.
Which is why. So one of the other chapters is adopting the world as my classroom. So as you might be able to tell, I believe in lifelong learning.
Right.
I consume new information, try to pull it into my world and make sense of it, and take what works for me and leave, let go what doesn't anymore. And that's what the smartest companies in the world are doing right now. They assume that you can't sit still, that you need to continuously train yourself, whether it's the CEO should, you would hope, be learning every day. Everybody up and down the organization should be learning. All of your customers should be learning. All of your partners. And all of that can be done in tiny little bits that don't bore the pants off of people and actually can be fun. And in just little nuggets that help nudge you along on the path so that you stay relevant.
Right, and
And it's much more
that's what
helpful.
you describe as the Gen Z. Like your definition of Gen Z is not necessarily an age marker, from 2015, whatever. It's
Yes.
about it's almost like a lifestyle or a mindset about what someone um, would have to be adaptive to the new environment around them.
Yeah,
And
so
yeah,
Gen Z is there. People can say you are Gen Z if you were born between 1995 and 2015. That by itself, to us, Gen Z, all of these generational names are useless. So if we can get that out of the way,
okay,
to us, there is no something after Gen Z from a generational label standpoint because we feel that those labels have already expired. But what the effect is of Gen Z coming to be born during a time frame where they've never known literally what it's like to be not connected, right? So this kind of thing that we're doing here, they do this all day long.
right,
This is not weird.
right,
It's very normal, and that's the standard, and we're all getting used to that. So the effect is that essentially the new generation is dropping a pebble into the water that ripples out to the rest of us
right,
and sweeps all of us up in this. And there have always been people in every generation that are always on the trailing edge, or the leading edge rather, of whatever changes come along. It has nothing to do with their actual age. It might be their mental age and their willingness to adapt to things, but that's very different. You can have let's say a 20-year-old who's very rooted in believing that they know everything, which a lot of 20 years old always do. I myself included when I was 20.
yeah,
And that's a normal phenomenon. But there are also plenty of traditional, grumpy old men who believe that they know it all and don't need change, and the world can continue to spin around them because they're already set in their ways. But just because they believe that doesn't mean that it's true.
Right.
And if you decide to, you can actually make the leap, which is the more positive side of slingshotting. Is there's been, I'm a technology guy. I actually have a stack of computers here. I have an original iPod from 1998, 2000, something like that.
Yeah.
A 5 gig spinning disk inside of it, which is crazy.
Right.
Versus my large iPhone 6 Plus, which is 128 gig, which
right. So
less
as
money.
I understand, so Gen Z is really just about saying, okay, I embrace change, I embrace learning, I embrace that there is more to the status quo that used to exist is no longer, and it's about adapting these new ways of interacting, connecting, learning. So Gen Z, is that how you're defining? Is there anything that I'm missing in terms of what Gen Z is?
Yeah, so we're saying that you might inherit some characteristics if you were born Gen Z in that time frame. So you just happened to grow up during the age when iPhones became possible and iPads and Wi-Fi and all that kind of stuff. But you can also choose to be Gen Z because all of that's also available to everybody else. And actually, everybody who's older than Gen Z has the money to afford it.
Right.
So there's not much of an excuse there. So it's kind of dramatically leveled the potential for anybody of any age who wants to be a part of this to take part.
Right.
And
that's actually the key thing, I think, because what you actually talk about a couple different examples of reverse mentoring. And that's an example of people who are saying, yes, I want to take part. I understand that I'm throwing away all this notion of generations and it being a way to divide us. Let's actually figure out a way where we can all learn and benefit from each other's perspective. And you have a couple different companies that are doing that. Can you tell the listeners those different companies and what they're doing as an illustration of what is? Because once you change that mindset, right, you have to say, okay, let's remove this structure called generations and say, let's throw that all away. And the next thing is, okay, well then how can we, if we throw that all away, what happens? What happens when we throw that all away? And then there's some companies that are doing some interesting things. Tell us about them.
Sure. So I'll step back for a second. So let's talk about mentoring first.
Right. Okay.
Which doesn't happen anywhere near as often as it should in most companies, which is unfortunate. But great companies have been doing that for a long time. So a traditional mentoring situation is somebody in a management position, usually the executive level, is mentoring somebody much younger, typically straight out of college. And that's part of an onboarding process, essentially. And it's part of the way to spread the culture of the company and help people to navigate some of the hidden traps that aren't documented anywhere.
Right.
That they might need to know politically, for example, some of the history of the company, what used to be done but it's no longer allowed, or failed projects, kind of where the skeletons are in some cases. Reverse mentoring is literally flipping that upside down. So instead of assuming that the only wisdom comes from the older people, there can be plenty of insights that you can gain from younger people. They might bring a fresh eye to it. They might have more time, frankly, to experiment with things like Snapchat or Instagram, or fill in the blank with any app that's just popped up. Pokemon Go, you probably don't see a lot of Fortune 50 CEOs wandering around trying to find Pokemon.
Exactly. Okay. So what would it look like? Give me an example of a couple of companies that have experimented and what worked well, and what are they doing, and what resulted when they when they did reverse mentoring.
Right. So there's a lot of examples. So GE is one of the more famous examples, which I think is interesting. Jack Welch was not known as a particularly nice, friendly, huggable kind of guy.
Yeah, I used to work at GE for my those are my formative work years were at GE.
Okay.
I get it.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not, that culture was not known for being warm and fuzzy.
No.
I think it's safe to say. And Jack ran I think his book was From the Gut. There was not a lot of thinking necessarily. But he actually insisted that all executives do reverse mentoring. The challenge was finding the right partner for them to reverse mentor with. So one of the main challenges for doing reverse mentoring, like any mentoring or any relationship, is you need to get along with the person that you're going to be partnered up with. And if you don't, then it's probably not worth fixing that.
Right.
That's a different issue. So find sort of a posse of people that might be ripe for mentoring and reverse mentoring, the mentor and the mentee, and allow them to get to know each other. If it seems to have some chemistry there, and it's clear that they're not going to be intimidated one way or the other, then now we can start to just explain. It's the core of it is just observing, instead of me projecting onto you what I believe your response is to an ad, for example. Why don't I just ask you what your response is to the ad, instead of thinking, oh, because it's on Snapchat, that you're going to love it because you're a millennial.
Right.
No, there's still plenty of stupid ads, and they're stupid for everybody.
Right.
There's also wonderful ads. Right. They're wonderful for everybody. And there's also the subset where I love it and you don't, and it has nothing to do with our age. It's just a different perception.
Yeah.
So it's really about, let's talk about the reality of what you perceive, and not having me make assumptions about that. I will just literally ask you, and that's one of those techniques is called empathetic listening, which is part of the design thinking toolkit, which has been made famous by the company IDEO or Continuum. There's lots of design firms that kind of came up with this toolkit. I have a couple of decks of cards that are about design thinking that I use every once in a while to remind me some of the techniques.
Right.
It's taught at the Stanford D School, which is the design school, which is the opposite side of the Stanford B School, the business school.
Yeah, we had Bernie Roth on before, who is that?
Oh, okay.
Same idea. So the whole idea with this reverse mentoring is, so what would it look like? So there's some other companies, I know that you did it in the company that you worked in, and then
yes.
And so what does it what has to have happened? And I know these business schools, and in your book, the last chapters or the last parts of it were literally like, if you wanted to put something in, what would it look like? But tell us about your own experience when you were, right out of Berkeley Music School, and you're smart people, and like what happened? Like what are the ripe? So if I'm a young person coming in, and I want to, because I'm actually this is all I know about the research. I'm a young person coming in. I feel like I have ability to have power and influence, and I know this technology really well. I wanted to start adding value right away. So that was probably you when you were younger and entering in. I mean, in your 20s. I shouldn't say when you're younger. I don't know how old you are. But in your 20s, you came in with that
I was definitely younger.
attitude. Okay, well, you came in your 20s with that attitude.
Yes.
What kind of people were receptive to that message? If you were to I know not to generalize, but what would you say if I were to, I'm now 20 years old, I'm entering the workforce, and I want to have that same kind of impact Dan had. Who would I be looking for?
Yeah, so it was interesting. At the time, I was leaving a previous job, so this was my second job out of college, and the company that I was leaving, they were going to be moving to from Massachusetts to Rhode Island, and they gave a lot of us notice, like about 8 weeks of notice, that we wouldn't have our positions anymore, but we'd still have a job in the meantime, and we should take whatever time we needed to interview and find another position, which was kind of amazing. I didn't realize what a gift that was at the time. But I got very good at interviewing, because at the time I probably went on 100 interviews. So I kind of felt like I packed as many as I could.
Right.
Because why not?
Yeah,
I have all the
I have
8 weeks.
For it, right.
Yeah, why not? I have nothing to lose. So I essentially got to choose which company I wanted to work for at the time, because I got very good at interviewing during that process.
Right.
And actually, in the interview with Delphi Group, which is where I ended up, that Tom still owns and operates, I actually flipped the script a little bit and started interviewing them to find out if I wanted to work there, which I think is tremendously powerful technique, and everybody should do that, because you should know what you're getting into.
Right.
And I actually asked Carl, who was the co-founder, where he had asked me where I thought I would be in 5 years, so kind of a standard interview question. And I asked him, so where do you see you and yourself in 5 years?
I love it. Okay.
And he said, that's funny. I've never actually thought about that.
I just want to hear your answer to that.
Yeah. And that was actually, I later on, once I left Delphi, I started a company with Carl. That was 17 years later. But what I mean, we tell the story pretty nicely in the book. What was interesting about Tom Klopplis, my co-author and the CEO, was that I was coming in blind. I didn't have any business experience. I was probably one of the few people who did not go to a business-oriented college, and so in a lot of ways, I didn't know any better. And I didn't know what to expect, so I kind of made up my own way.
Right.
And I was blazing. I came on in 1994, which was essentially when the internet started to take off. And I built our first websites. And so I was actually the guy who knew what he was talking about because I was at the cutting edge of making it happen, which in some ways put me in a position of power. But I happen to be a collaborator rather than a power hoarder. So I was, we need to do more on the web because pretty sure this is going to be a big thing.
Right.
And little did I know. I mean, nobody predicted what it is now. But that was just part of my nature. I was always exploring. I came at things being willing to toss out previous assumptions about how we used to do things, how anybody might have done things, and just leverage that. And Tom was wide open to that. We would famously just have kind of throwaway conversations on a Monday morning about some random idea, and I'd whip up a prototype, and we'd be looking at Monday afternoon, say, hey, we should market this now, and we'll launch this event or this piece of research or whatever that'll be happening in 3 months, all based on a 5 or 10 minute conversation that we just happen to have.
So it was that you had a receptive recipient of your mentoring, which was Tom, right? He
Yes.
was receptive. And what made him receptive? Like, what kind of mindset did Tom have to have in order for those 5-minute meetings and launching to even occur?
Right. So I think it's similar. Not assuming that any answer that he might have gone to before we started talking was always going to be the answer. We used to sometimes. I used to joke that sometimes he was more persistent than I was in some things. I'd be willing to drop things fairly quickly if I thought they weren't going to go anywhere. I would joke about, is it insanity to keep doing the same thing over and over again and not get the desired result, or is that persistence? So I think we kind of made a nice sort of yin and yang going on there, because I was more focused on ideas and he was more focused on getting the ideas that would work into the market. So between the two of us, and sometimes we would flip those roles. You can't just have a bunch of idea guys, because they won't accomplish much.
Right.
Lots and lots of ideas will be spewed out, but nothing will happen.
Right.
So it was finding a balance there, and it would flip often.
Right, and I think actually this is actually a sweet spot, I think, for millennials or people in the generation, or people who fit this mindset, people who have a bunch of different ideas, Gen Z folks, that it's about one, collaboration, because what I heard you say was the key in both cases is both of you were willing to collaborate and be open.
Yes.
Because if neither of you were willing to be collaborative or open, that whole thing wouldn't have worked. And the other thing I heard you say in that example is that each of you had a unique role. Like, you're the ideation guy, he was about executing, and you were willing to flip those roles. Like, it was a fluid role reversal back and forth. And in order for these kind of collaborative experiences, both of you have to recognize that each of you has something to bring, right? He has the experience to go, okay, that's a great idea, but how are we going to execute? He was a cynic or the pragmatist who's saying, okay, that's not going to work, but let's actually figure out how we can do something practical, right? Because he had a bunch of life experiences that you did not, right? Like you said, I'm coming in as an open book. And then they're vice versa. You had a bunch of experiences launching the website that he did not, that you're like, that's not going to work, that's not going to work. But it seems like you have to walk in with that partnership, or that whole thing wouldn't have worked, right? I mean,
yes, right. And that's part of the finding the right relationship to have a mentorship or reverse mentorship. I mean, they're ultimately the same thing, and it can't be a one-way street. It has to be a two-way street. It's an exchange. And the people who do any kind of mentorship, it's never clear to either one of them who got more out of it.
Right.
If it's done well, it's great for both of them. They both learn far more than they ever could have thought.
Right.
And in very different ways than they probably conceived of up front.
Right.
It's not just, it's probably, so stereotypically, we in this interchange, we've fallen into the trap of talking about technology. But technology, we're all using technology, you could learn a lot about behavior. You could learn about marketing techniques. There's buying habits, all sorts of things. It's not just the young people using technology faster, earlier, more often, being willing to swap to the next whatever takes over for whatever was came after Skype, for example. It could be about something totally different, and that's part of the keeping open to the whole process, is not assuming that, oh, because I'm partnered up with somebody younger than me, I'm going to learn all about the technology that I don't currently understand. That could be true.
Right.
But there's probably a whole bunch of stuff that you can learn that was not in that bucket.
Yeah, there's a description in your book of talking about influence, and there's this old notion of reciprocity. And in that particular case, there's this idea of reciprocity that was happening in your relationship with your boss. And if that hadn't happened, you would be like, what are you, just pumping me for information? What am I getting out of this whole exchange, right?
Yes, right, exactly.
But there was a sense of like, you're getting something, I'm getting something, and we've lost count because both of our needs are being met. And I think that is a fundamentally different, and you had talked about power dynamics, because I think that's part of the things that is shifting, and something that you talk about, I think, very eloquently in your book about the power dynamics and how the power is now shifting. I mean, it used to be in corporations that the authorities were just, you got power through positional power. I'm the CEO, I'm the CFO, I'm the whatever with an O at the end, but I'm like the person that's the authority that you must listen to and follow and obey, right? Like there's this kind of patriarchal kind of feeling to it, right? And it's like, don't question, just make it happen, just do what I'm saying, And this is kind of the way that I, like when I was in corporations, it's like, yes sir, I'll dot it, yes ma'am. There's no ma'am, by the way. But let's hypothetically say there is a ma'am. I'll be like, yes sir, I'll do it. When do you want me to get it done? Okay. That means I may have to miss my family vacation. It's okay. Like, I need to do whatever you say now, exactly like you say it, right?
Right, yes.
And now, right, because those are the power dynamics.
Let it all out.
Yeah. I know. Look at me. I'm so tormented from my experience. No, but I think that those are the power dynamics in which my generation was raised in, right? This is how what our relationship to authority meant, how we're supposed to react to authority. Yes, sir, I got it. I'll do it for you, sir, right? You want me to have no work-life family balance? Fine. You want me to, not go to a funeral? Fine. Like, you just do whatever you need to do because this is the authority and you must comply. Now, that's all flipped over, right? For a lot of good reasons. What are the technological, and I think you did it so beautifully in the book that I won't even attempt to describe it, but what are the changes that are creating the shift in power?
Yeah, well, hopefully that runs throughout the book. That was kind of I hope the common thread throughout it.
It was, absolutely, yeah.
It makes it a little difficult to peel it apart. So that's why there's the 6 forces. So one of them, the first one is about breaking generations, where we describe the population pyramid, which is a huge part of this baggage that we've all taken on through hierarchical structures in any kind of organization. And it's just the sheer fact of the matter is that the population pyramid, for people who don't already know about this, you can picture the actual population of the world, of any segment of the world, as a pyramid. The bottom part is where you are born, and each, the way that statisticians look at it, they typically use it 5-year age bands. So you build from the bottom of the pyramid. There are more people at the bottom of the pyramid than there are in the next level, because a certain percentage die off. It's the death rate, and statisticians talk about it. So historically, that pyramid taps out around, somewhere, depending on where we are in history, between 50 to 80 years old. And we all exit at some point, so it's only a matter of time, which is the bad news, I suppose, but all good things must come to pass. So that pyramid structure shaped, unknowingly, invisibly, a lot of the way that the world was structured, because that's the fact of the matter. So a certain percentage of people made it to old age. They were the shamans, they were the CEOs, they were the presidents, they were the whatever they happened to be, but the person in power was the one who lived the longest and got to stick around.
Right.
And sometimes lived the longest because he got rid of people underneath him. But
historically speaking, yes, absolutely.
Yes, definitely not current times.
Right.
So that has been shifting as people are living longer. So we have better access to healthcare. We are eating more healthily in general. People tend to be in better shape overall. And just, in the dark ages, if you live to be 20, you were an old person.
Right.
These days, if you live to be 100, that's not unheard of. There's far more people that live to be 100 than you might think of.
Right.
There's plenty of people who are at 90 to 100 who are still very active and have jobs that I wish I had.
Right.
There's a woman who works for IDEO. She got that job. She was 92, I believe. This is like last year. And I hate her. She has the job I want. She'll be gone soon.
Okay. Okay. So it's basically because now it used to be this pyramid of which like I now earn this status because I'm
because you made it.
Because I made it to the top. And so listen to me. And now it's like actually the pyramid is like we've also made it. So
yes,
it's
exactly.
Like a big pyramid where it's like, well, and then I think the other thing that you've mentioned is that Google with this search engine and social media has actually allowed people at the bottom who didn't really even have a voice to organize and have a voice. And so now they actually have like these people, these rock stars on the internet from YouTube that were like nowhere. And now they're making millions of dollars for no offense, some stupid puppy video series that they have had, right? It's like...
I wish I thought of it.
I know, I'm like, oh, look at all those stupid puppy videos. You're probably making $500,000 a year and you're 10 years old or whatever you are. But like, but some of the status quo, if like you can actually have a 15-year-old, you talked about, what's the name of that nonprofit again, who...
Free the Children.
Free the Children, right? He started when he was 15 or 12, I can't remember. But
I believe it was 12. Yep.
12. He's 12 years old. He starts a nonprofit, and he is able to garner the energy, the excitement of other people his age and create a social movement all of a sudden. So here he is, a 12-year-old, which in older times, like maybe Nadia Comaneci like captivated us for like 2 weeks during the Olympics, and like now we're like, who is she? But some 12-year-old is able to like garner all this money, all these resources, and have a huge social impact. So all of a sudden, the influence and power that a 12-year-old would have is completely different than 12-year-olds of any generation have had, and the voice of a small person who before, maybe did not have a voice, all of a sudden has a voice that can compete against the CBS, because even though CBS bought airtime and had the power of money to buy influence, now that's no longer the currency of influence. And I think that's one of the things that I loved in your book. It's like, aha, I got a huge aha.
Yes. Okay, great. Yeah. So and so these are all tied together. So the population pyramid has been morphing to what we call the dome, which is sort of an in-between state, so that the pyramid starts shifting out a bit. And it's sort of rounded on the top, so we're living longer. Everybody in every age band is living longer. It's moving towards the population pyramid, where it's literally by around, the predictions around 2080, or 2100 maybe, that every age band will be almost identical at about 6% of the population in every age band from 0 to 65.
Wow, that's interesting.
By default, it's going to change. It's already been changing the way that we think of power.
Right.
Because there are far more people.
People at the top don't get the voice that they used to. It's like now we're a big, you said a dome or a square? Or
it's a skyscraper.
A skyscraper. You have a huge skyscraper of which we're all equal. Who said that because you're older, you get more resources than I do, or that you get more mind share than I do, or you have more power than I do? Like,
yes.
I challenge that whole construct, right? Which is what... We've raised these people in Gen Z in some cases, or people of my generation who choose to be Gen Z. It's like they've been raised with these ideas. And what's interesting is I've, as a parent of two, I have a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old. I just viewed all of this as parenting styles that were in vogue during the time when they were younger, right? They were rewarded like, you do this and you get 5 points, and after you do that, you do the dishes, you get 5 points. You clean out the trash, you get 2 points, and after you get 10 points, you get to get like a stuffed animal. Like so we've raised these. I mean, that was.
So you're not a tiger mom, then?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. So that kind of idea, and emotional intelligence and positive parenting.
Yes.
It's like, let's talk about what affirms them and makes them great versus why they're wrong and broken and stupid and why they need to change. Let's actually
Yes.
accept and embrace them. So these are all the things that have, I thought like it was a product of my poor parenting or good parenting. I don't even know anymore, but it's a product of my parenting. But what I thought was interesting is it's also a product of the technology. The technology was moving at the same pace, and it's unsure who was what was the chicken and the egg, right? Like,
Yeah. Right.
because there's all sorts of different things. You know, you have gaming, which is about rewards and
Yes.
rewards for collaboration,
Yep.
and recognition. You've got all these likes, like whether, like all of a sudden, people care about whether they're liked or not on Facebook.
Yeah. Literally. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally how things are working, and so it's a
Right.
really the parenting things are reinforcing that behavior. The technology is reinforcing that behavior, and so when you think of rewards. One of the common complaints about people from the younger generation coming in, it's like, you're entitled, you need rewards, you need feedback. Like, I never got any of those things. Why should you get any of those things?
Yes.
So, what are the trends that were happening that kind of explain why this younger generation, people at least in the younger generation, want rewards, feedback, those
Right.
kind of things?
Well, they want to continue to have it because they've always had it.
Right.
It's part of it. I mean, that is one of the that's what kind of ties a generation to itself.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it was that you grew up with during that time frame when you were the most susceptible to being imprinted, essentially,
Right.
is what you expect later. That's perfectly natural, right? I
Right.
mean, that's the way humans work, as far as
Right.
we know. And I do use games as examples because they are very powerful. I happen to know a bunch of game designers. One of the best guys that I ever had that worked for me in our little development team later went on to be a game designer and worked at Ubisoft and a number of other game companies. And great game design doesn't happen by accident. They actually know what they're doing. It turns out. It's a huge. I don't think people actually realize, how big an industry it is.
Yeah.
It's. I believe it's surpassed the amount of money that the movie industry makes at this
Wow.
point.
I had no
And
idea.
part of that is because there's in-game, purchases and downloadable content and all those kinds of things that extend the revenue stream for quite a while, usually at least a year or two for any given game. But it is in their best interest to make sure that gamers are motivated to not just buy the game in the first place, but to actually continue to play it. Because if they don't continue to play it, then they can't sell them the things that are in the game
Right.
that are going to be released, 2 or 3 months later for downloadable content, maps and things like that. So they test that. They don't make any assumptions. Just because something worked in a previous game that's very similar doesn't mean it's still going to work. So there's a huge amount of testing that goes into, is this game fun, among other things, and do you feel like you're making progress? And that's what millennials and Gen Z are getting beat up about, is wanting to get feedback about progress. But that's perfectly normal. Why wouldn't you want to know? Like if you're on a car trip, if you've ever done a road trip, you kind of want to know, am I 10 miles from my destination, or am I 10,000 miles from my destination? Because that sort of changes how I'm thinking about how I'm going to survive the rest of this journey.
Right. Well, I'm mapping two different things in my head when you're describing
Okay.
this. I'm mapping to, when you go to, so if I were to talk to some HR person and I'd say, what do you care about? I care about engagement. I want people to be engaged and motivated in this work. And
Right.
And then they're like, why do you always have to get feedback? It's like, right? I mean, it's very similar. So, and what's interesting when you were describing the game design is that this is how human beings work. It's not just about millennials.
Yes.
It's just because we didn't get positive reinforcement, love, rewards, and clear expectations doesn't mean that we should continue that nonsense. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So why
Yes.
is it such a surprise to us that something that's so core to human nature is what people need? And
Right.
and I think that corporations are resistant to giving that, and so
Yes.
but we want it, but we don't want to give it to anyone else. I never got that, so why should you get that?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's a little bit broken, and it's funny because I was thinking about that, about, when you talk to HR people, it's like, I want
Mm.
motivation, I want engagement, I want
Right.
loyalty. Well,
Right.
yeah, there's some fundamental things that you have to do to cultivate that. You can't just keep on playing the same old game you've been playing and
Right.
expect to get new results. Like, the
Yes.
old
Exactly.
game is not motivating or exciting to people. So,
Yes.
um,
Yes.
I don't know. So I think about, and then
Seems obvious, doesn't it?
it does seem super obvious. My son, he does videos. He does video editing, and I said, so
Okay.
I'm reading this book about Gen Z and just generally about feedback and what you need.
Mm.
And I said, when you created videos, how important is feedback? He's like, Mom, that's how I know if I'm doing well. If I put up a
Yeah.
YouTube video and the comments I get is how I actually know what people
Right.
want and expect. Because if I don't
Yes.
get
Yep.
feedback, then I don't know what people want and expect. And I
Yep.
can't change. So this is the mindset, right? And it
That's awesome.
seems obvious.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I don't
Yeah.
know. Are any companies doing this well?
Yeah. So that kind of thing, that's design thinking sort of stuff, which is Anthropology. So one of the examples, a good friend of mine, Kevin Davis, was at Lowe's Home Improvement. His nickname is the Data Man,
Mm-hmm.
and they did what they called online anthropology.
Mm-hmm.
So this would have been around 2008, I believe, something like that. So Twitter had been around for a while. Facebook was taking off. People were actually saying the things that they might have said privately out loud.
Right.
So they could peer essentially into the minds of their customers or
Right.
competitors or prospects or whatever and see what they were saying to find out how are they deciding when it's time to buy things, especially a high ticket. Like if you're doing a kitchen remodel, you're going to drop $20,000 to $40,000
Right.
probably.
Yeah.
Not an inexpensive prospect.
Right.
So they were interested in what was it that drove people to make their decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Did they poll their peers socially to say, "Hey, I'm looking at this kind of cabinet. Anybody else use these, or have they used the professional services for the Lowe's Home Improvement installation department?" And they wanted to see what that meant in the buying life cycle. So were there moments when they could spot somebody publicly saying that they were at a time frame where maybe they needed a little bit of a nudge that gave them a credit line so they could afford to do the remodel.
Right.
So it wasn't that they were trying to manipulate somebody. They're trying to do, they wanted to do this. They'd
Right.
done all the research to say, this is the kitchen I'd love to have. I can't afford it. Well, are you aware that we have a 0% interest loan for the next 5 years that you could use to purchase this? And hopefully you're still being responsible in general with your finances. But
Right.
if that helps get you over the boundary, then the customer wins and Lowe's wins.
Right.
Which is, you would think that's the kind of partnership that you want if you're going to be doing a project like that.
Right.
So they did a ton of analysis of what people were saying online, combined with they have billions and billions of transactions, what people have actually bought at Lowe's.
Right.
And that gave them great insights into exactly when people were thinking things that they might want to change.
Right. So it's kind of the idea of when companies embrace this idea that feedback is important, they can actually improve their business processes if they're
Yes.
open
Oh, yeah.
to looking at the data and seeing it as feedback and kind of looking and doing the being data guys or data gals themselves. Like
Yep.
it's when people are willing to embrace, like there's knowledge and information if we listen to feedback and if we kind of analyze the data. But most companies are open to that, don't you think? Or some companies still like don't care
They're
about
still
that?
trying to figure it out. That's what big data is all about. And it's, somewhat creepy in some ways because you really are kind of looking into people's minds.
Yeah.
But it makes for much smarter decisions, much better advertising spend. To me, it's got more upside than it has downside,
Yeah.
as long as people are curb their enthusiasm a little bit.
So we actually we've been talking to Dan Knutson, and we've been talking about Keldsen, about your book, The Gen Z Effect, and we've kind of covered like the whole book in like little appetizer versions. If
Yeah.
folks actually want to learn more about your book, where should they go?
Sure. So you go to thegenzeffect.com, or you can find us on Amazon, Kindle edition, hardcover, audiobook. If you want to hear my voice even further, Tom and I co-narrated the Audible version.
Oh, cool! Very cool.
Yeah, so it's still not hard to find. It's done quite well. So as a first-time author, very happy with that. This is Tom's 10th book, I believe.
Wow. That's great.
Yes.
Well, congratulations on your success. Thank you so much for being here. I think that what
Yeah.
you did is you added a kind of a different aspect, a technology aspect for why this younger generation is the way that they are. Because I think
Hmm.
sometimes we're in a state of denial, like they just emerged out of nowhere to be this like person that we don't understand. Yet most of us have raised them, because most people who
Right.
are in management positions are my age, and they've raised these children, and now they're like, "How did you arrive this way?" I love it. So thank you so much for being here. Thanks for adding insight and information and perspective to us. Thank you so much.
Great.
Folks, if you
Thanks,
actually
CJ.
want to see the show, you can see it on firedupwithcj.com on Facebook, Twitter, and then YouTube. And my website, www.firedupwithcj.com. And of course,
Great.
there's a genzeffect.com if you want to find out more about the book. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. I would love your support in any way by giving me comments below, or to subscribe to the show, or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.